Welcome to my channel. It's Henry, your favorite data engineer. In today's video, we're going to look at two very important things, right? This is a very important topic because it helps improve your execution or your coding ability in a very special way. What is this topic? Now, we're going to look at how query execution is done by the SQL engine. What do I mean by that? The way we write queries, right? The structure or process that by which we write our queries or our code, SQL codes, the syntax that we follow, it's totally different or it's totally different from how the SQL engine executes this code, right? Why is this important? The reason why this is important is because, one, it helps you write faster code. It helps you understand how this engine executes your code, by which you are able to detect errors and ways by which you can improve your code. 3, it also helps you to be able to understand how queries are executed and enhancing your efficiency in writing better code and much more easier codes when necessary. And finding errors, you can easily find errors to fix them as fast as possible. Now, that is the main reason why you need to understand how the difference between you writing your queries or your SQL code and the engine executing this code, the process the engine follows to be able to execute this code. That tells you which areas or which aspects of the syntax to improve. Now, let's just go straight in and take a look at how this is done. All right. Great. Now let's continue. To begin with, let's take a table. We look at a table, then we use that to create a scenario, and we look at how the syntax for SQL is written. With that, then we compare it to how the engine executes it. You will see the big difference on how engine executes or reads the query you wrote versus how you started writing your query. The first thing you wrote, right? Now we'll use two tables. First, we'll look at I think the compute resource has, let's look at this. Yeah, the serverless has started. So this is the table we use. Stores sales. Then we also use sales transaction. These are already inbuilt tables, already available sample tables that are made available to us from Databricks free edition, right? Once you create your Databricks free edition account, you would have access to this as well, these tables as well. So these are not created by me, but available by default from Databricks free edition. Now let's create our query editor, right? Then we name this SQL syntax, right? SQL syntax. Okay, now let's look at how we begin writing a query. In query functions, right? In writing a SQL code, the process by which we write it, you as human, you write it when you look at a query code, is to begin with your select function, right? Then you say what you want to select. From there, you bring where you want the select to happen, right, to take place. Now you're saying it should go to this table, sales store. From our scenario, we should come to this sales table, right, and select everything within this table. Let's just run this table, and then based on that, we'll use it to look at other things. Okay, this is how the table looks like. Good. Now, with this particular table process, how did we begin? We wrote the first value select, and we told the SQL, okay, these are the things we want you to select. Then we asked the SQL to go and look for these items from this table, right? Great. Now, what next? What is the next process that you follow whenever you're writing a full SQL code? The next thing we do is to look out for if we have other tables that we want information from, right? Which is the join. This could be left join, inner join, full outer join, left inner join, left outer join, any join. You just bring your join right immediately after the from. That is how you write it, right? You cannot bring a select here, it wouldn't work, right? The next thing is to bring a join. That's how the syntax is, or the structure. That is how the process flows, right? You write it, you bring a join. Let's say you have a scenario, you are going to join with this table, for example, right? So we join it with this table, but currently we won't join, we are not going to run this table, this code. We're just using it to explain how you write your code versus how the SQL engine executes or reads the code and brings you results. The process it follows is different from how you are typing it. Currently, this is how we type it, right? You type this way. You select, you tell it which items you want to select from which table, this table. If there's a join, you bring another join to the table, right? Right after the join, the next thing that follows, how we write it, is your where. That's your where condition, or where your where clause. Maybe you want to filter, let's just say you want to filter by ticket numbers, ss underscore ticket underscore number, right? And see ones that are less or equal to 78. So this is a clause you've given it, a where clause, saying I want to filter this table for values as ticket numbers that are less or equal to 78. Look at how we wrote it. Select the items, the from, the join, then the next command is the join, followed by the where. That is how we wrote it. The reason why I'm emphasizing this is because when we go to looking at how the SQL code, the engine understands and executes it, you see a very vast difference from what you typed. Very vast difference. You see vast difference from what you typed. And that is where the point where you need to understand very critically, and then it tells you how to improve your code. When we type it this way, the next thing is we bring a group by. If we want to group by maybe some values, right? For instance, this we want to group by, and group by normally goes with aggregates, right? Maybe let's aggregate, let's sum ss underscore quantity, right, as total quantity, this way, right? And maybe we want to group by the date, so group by ss underscore sold date underscore sk. If you leave it this way, by default it groups in ascending order, right? It groups in ascending, it groups by itself, right, in ascending order. You can group by descending order as well, all depends on you, right? Now, okay, with this, the next thing we have from after executing group by is to bring your having clause, right? Right. So having is also another kind of filter, but it's also different. So you bring your having, then the next thing you bring is your order by. Maybe you want to order it by sales date as well. Sold date underscore sk. And if you want to order by, you can order by descending order by doing this way, or by default ascending order, right? By default is ascending order, you can leave it that way. The next command that you bring according to how you write your query is to bring the limit code, right? The limit. Let's say you've already run the query and you just want the first 10 values, not in a particular order, just the first 10 values. So the first 10 results, right? Let's say first 10. Now let me bring this down. Great. So looking at this query, right, the structure that we just wrote this query, the first thing we did was to write a select, then we specified what we want the engine to select, right, to bring the result. and we told the engine to bring it from this table. In the event we want to do a join, then we followed by the join. The next thing we wrote was to bring a where clause to filter our data, right? A where condition. This filters the total results that we have. And then we have a group by to group the data by some categories that we want. We have the having. It's also another type of filter, but it's very different from how the where clause, right? Then we have the order by. You order by some values that you want, right? You order by maybe date, time, all that. You can order by, and you can specify the ascending or descending order. The limit is the last thing most often we do. That is to limit to the 10 values that we have, right? Just limit it to the 10 values. With this understanding of how we type the query or the syntax that we followed to type this, let's move on to how the engine reads and executes this query for us. Let's go to my board, right? Great. Now let's first have a topic and then provide this, right? So let's call this how we write query code. And then we look at, let's copy and paste here, and we look at how SQL Engine executes query code, right? So we look at these two things. First, we have how we type it, which we just did here, from the select, and then to the from, join, where, group by, having, order by, and limit. We will list that here to give you a good understanding of how the steps that we followed to do it, right? So let's bring another text and say the first thing we did was to type a select, right? If you followed us, if you followed what I did, you should remember that the first thing we did was to type a select. The next thing we did was to have a from, to type the from, right? So with this, let's say let's give this, right, from. Then we have the next thing we did was to do a join, right? Was to do a join this way. Then the next thing we did was to do a where clause, to have a where clause, right? After having a where clause, the next thing we did was to have a group by when we were typing it. If you remember, we had from select, we moved to where, from select, from, join, where, and then we moved to the group by, right, in that order. Now the next thing we did was to have the having. We brought a having, Great. Having, right? The having. Great. The next thing that we typed from this after having was order by. Order by. Bring the order by function code, right? The final thing that we did in the process was to have a limit by. A limit this way. This was how we wrote the SQL query, right? This is how we wrote the SQL query. A select, the next thing was from, the next thing was to have a join, a where clause, group by, having, order by, and limit. Now let's look at how the engine executes this code that we wrote here by the typing. If you look at the syntax we have here, it follows this order, right? Nice, it follows this order. But then let's look at the SQL engine. How do the SQL engine read this code that we wrote? Let's begin now. My question to you is, which of these code or query syntax begins the engine? What is the first thing that the engine does when you write your code? How does it read it from the beginning? Can you tell me? Great. I'm sure you didn't know, right? Now the first thing the engine does is to read from the from. It reads the from first because it needs to know where it is picking the data from. It needs to know which table it's going to look at to bring the data for you. Now the next thing the engine does after getting the first table or going to the first table is to look out for if there are other tables that it needs to look out for. That is the join. It then goes to the join to look out for other tables that it needs to get data from, right? So that is how the engine executes its code. It doesn't follow the order that you provided here. It has its own way of reading or executing your code. And with this tells you that when you want to improve your code, you should begin from looking at how you did your from, the table you are looking out for, right? The from is the first thing. When it's picking from the right table, it makes the engine produce results faster and easier for you. The next thing after the join it does is what? The where. Now it can filter the results that it has seen from these two tables or whatever tables that you have. It can now apply the filter or the where clause to filter the information for you first before it brings any other thing else, right? Can you tell me the next thing it does? Well, the next thing it does is to group by. It will then group the information or the data that you have, it has seen from all these results. It will then apply the group by, right? That is how it works. Now, after grouping this data, it has to apply the next step. That is how the engine, you could see that the select has not even come in for the result to pop up for you to see. Yes, that is how the engine executes the code. It doesn't follow this process that you have here, but this is how the engine reads the code that you wrote. And this tells you that if you want to improve your code and read faster or to produce faster results, you should understand the structure. This is how the engine executes it, and that is how it's going to provide you with results, right? And so from the group by, it's going to apply the having. Right? The next thing the engine is going to look out for, now it can bring the result for you. That's the select, right? This is where the select applies this time around. After bringing the results to you, then or finding the results that it needs to bring to you, then it applies the order by. It now orders the data by the whatever you specified. The final step is then to apply the limit. Now you can see the difference, a huge difference in how you write your queries versus how the engine applies its reads the query from the code you wrote, right? It tells you very different thing, right? Now this will tell you, look at where the select is. That is far below, right? Far below the execution process. Then the from, which is the first thing the engine does, is very important because that is the first thing it does, and then it looks out for any extra table that it needs to read from and then provides that for you. From there, then it applies the where, any filtering or where clause that it needs to do. Then it brings the group by. From the group by, then it can bring another filter, another type of filtering, which is where having. Then we can bring the order by and have the limit by. So this is how you write your code versus how the SQL engine executes this code. You could tell that there is very much difference in how the engine reads versus how you write your code. I hope with this understanding or with this information, you'll be able to improve your queries next time when you're writing them, and know where to improve your queries so that your queries engines run faster. They do not take a long time to read, and then you can be able to pass more interviews for yourself, right? It's been your favorite data engineer, Henry. Like, share, comment, and invite other people to follow my page. Thank you so much. Bye.